Hello, Biology 212 students. Welcome to our presentation on the phylum Tardigrada. My name is Alexis Gaspar.
And my name is Jocelyn Gonzalez.
Let's go ahead and get started with the classification of the Tardigrada. So a couple characteristics that they have bilateral symmetry. They are triploblastic, so that means that they have more than 2 cell layers, including tissue level organization and organ systems. Their body cavity is partially a coelom, so they also have a hemocoel and a coelom around their gonads. A hemocoel is basically a fluid-filled cavity that they have inside of their bodies. Most of them have a straight gut with an anus. They have a couple unique characteristics, such as the characteristics of eudalia, which is a fixed number of cells in the body of any adult of the Tardigrada phylum. They also experience ecdysis, which is growth through molting. They have a simple segmented body plan with a head and 4 leg segments, and they're also protostomes, so their mouth develops first. They are closely related to the arthropoda and the nematoda, and their etymology comes from the Latin words tardus, meaning slow, and gradior, meaning step, coming together to make the tardigrada name, slow stepping.
Onto the phylum Tardigrada. Even though it is a microorganism, there are over 1,000 species, and they can all be placed into 3 different classes: the Heterotardigrada, the Etardigrada, and Mesotardigrada. And how we could classify these is by 3 different morphological characters that we are distinguishing in the classes. Is by either the presence or the absence of the cephalic palavili or the cloacae, and we could see those in the anatomy slide very soon. They're also known to be very, very indestructible, mostly, since they could survive in a range between 149 Celsius to negative 272 degrees Celsius, so basically from the Arctic to the Antarctic.
Now jumping to the anatomy of the Tardigrada phylum. So over here on the left, we can see their body parts, digestive system, their nervous system, and their reproductive system, and the important structures of each system. They have intrinsic musculature, and some species actually have telescopic legs. They have a thin cuticle covering the entire body, and this cuticle is uncalcified and it's periodically molted. So it's occasionally secreted, actually all the time it's secreted by the underlying epidermis. And the cuticle is divided symmetrically and arranged into dorsal and lateral plates. The non-marine tardigrades can be very colorful. The color comes from the proteins of the cuticle, and a few of them experience cyclomorphosis, which is growth through a series of molts. They reach sexual maturity after 3 to 6 instars. An instar is a period between molting, and they have particularly 4 pairs of ventrolateral legs with 1 to up to 12 claws terminating on each leg. An interesting thing about them is that their legs actually have a coxa, a femur, a tibia, and tarsus, but there's no evidence of having homology to arthropods. Over here on the left, we can see a colorful picture of the tardigrada.
So onto the reproduction and the developing stages of the Tardigrada. So there's basically 2, since mostly the Tardigrada could be either semi-aquatic or terrestrial environment. So they can either live in the water or on land. They're mostly about like 0. or 0.55 millimeters. So they're really small and we could only see them during a microscope. So how we can note about this is that mostly terrestrial tardigradas are are self-fertilizing. So they mostly fertilize themselves. While aquatic species, they're mostly dioecious, which they need a partner to reproduce. So how they do it is by having sex with the single gonad. So it's mostly located above their guts. So how they do it is like males have 2 sperm ducts connected to a gonopore, and it's opening from in front of the anus or into the hindgut. So what would be typical is that the female will have a single oviduct opening in their single gonopore as well. So it's located in the hinder gut or the dorsal of the anus. So they mostly could lay about 1 to 30 eggs at a time, so they could dry them. And their courting gesture behavior, as we'll see in the video in just a moment, is by the male trying to insert itself to the female water bearer. And it's mostly different from the adults from their coloration and the number of spines and cilia they have and the number of claws. And they can mostly live up to a few months or up to years. And we'll see the video right now. So as we saw in this video, the male is actually crawling around the female in their circular pathway, and you can see the female isn't moving that much, and because she's holding still so it could have the egg produced. So once the male climbs onto the back of the female and touches its head with its mouth, the partner will remain there in the position for some time.
Now onto the food habits of the tardigrada. The tardigrades feed on the cellular fluids of different organisms by piercing the cell walls with their oral stylets. Some of the food items that they like to munch on include the bacteria, algae, protozoa, bryophytes, fungi, and decaying plant matter. So with all these different diet habits that they can be carnivorous, they can be omnivorous, they can be herbivorous, or even detrivorous. Their digestive system involves many different organs and symbiotic relationships with bacteria to help break down food. They have a stylet that punctures the prey cells. They have a pharyngeal bulb, mouth, salivary glands, and a sucking pharynx that help suck up fluids. They have an esophagus that leads to a stomach and midgut where digestion occurs, and a rectum for waste excretion.
In this next slide, we'll learn that the tardigrade are actually extreme thermophiles, which means they can live in any environment that we thought it was inhabitable of sustaining life. So what we will learn about these is that some environments will include intense heat, highly acidic environments, extreme pressure, and extreme cold. The first one is an oxybiosis, which basically means that it does have a lack of oxygen, which means organisms have to take in water and become turgid or immobile. The next word will be the incitement, which would mean that the many organisms, such as the tardigrade, will be adopt to the dormant or highly resistant state, which means the release of the reproductive stage. And anhydrobioism will be the life without water, which means had to survive with the loss of all or almost every water in their state. The last one would be the osmobios, which means that is a form of cryptobiosis triggered by the increase of the soluble concentration in the solution. And right here we have the metabolic activity, which is reducing the unfavorable environment condition. So as we can see in this image right here, we can see the many forms of the tardigrades changing during these environments.
Now on to some cool facts about the tardigrades. The tardigrada are also called water bears, owing to the fact that they look like bears, and they're really adorable. Tardigrades can actually recover after immersion in toxic environments, as Jocelyn mentioned. They can survive in ether, they can survive in alcohol, they can survive in highly acidic environments, and they can even survive in space. They're actually studied in astrobiology for their survivability traits, and they're also studied at a couple universities in the UC California system, where they're studying how a few genes in the tardigrada organisms can actually protect the organism from ionizing radiation. Now on to a few questions regarding the phylum Tardigrada. Number one, you place a tardigrade in a salty environment and notice that the tardigrade undergoes ton formation. Which cryptobiotic state is this tardigrade in?
The second question will be you are a lab assistant to a researcher in Goldstein lab. You come across a colony of tardigrades and notice the females are moving away from the male tardigrade. What do you suppose the male would do? You will find the answers to these questions if you were paying attention to our slides, and you will notice the answers will be there.
Finally, here are our references. Thank you very much.